Hello, everybody. This is the second part of the Era of Good Feelings notes. There was just a little too much to cover in one day, and I thought that it'd be great to take this entire second portion to talk about a really important aspect of the Era of Good Feelings, which is the American system. So let's learn a little bit more about the American system. Our objective question for today is, how did the American system change the United States? All right, if we look at these two maps, one on the left is from 1810 and one on the right is from 1820, and you'll see the key in the bottom: the darker the color, the more people live per square mile. And if you look at those two side by side and compare them, what you'll begin to notice is that there's a lot more darker area on the left side of the map in the right-hand map in the 1820. And that means that we have a lot more people living out here in the western area versus all along the East Coast. Now, there's still plenty of people there, right? These are darkening as well. But when we compare this area specifically, right, to this, we see that a lot more people are moving westward. And it's not just that there are more people moving westward, we actually start to have more people. So let's find out a little bit more about that. So the American system is the economic and kind of political system that the United States is going to operate under during this time period. And the American system is developed by, of course, our man, Henry Clay. Remember, he's going to continue to show up throughout the next few units. He's the Hamilton of this unit. He's involved in absolutely everything. He's a very prominent politician at this point. So he develops the American system, and the American system is simply the policy of federalism, right? The federal government and the state government, getting together. And the goal of it is to help unify the nation, to make it stronger, wealthier, and more powerful. All right. So there are a few aspects of the American system, three major aspects. The first are going to be protective tariffs, specifically the tariff of 1816. We're going to put tariffs on imported goods, so those are goods made in other places coming into the United States, and a tariff is just like a tax. And by placing those tariffs on imported goods, American goods are almost always going to be cheaper, which means for the average consumer, they're a little bit more appealing. A very quick example: if I am selling barrels of honey, and I'm selling barrels of honey for $5 each, but Spain is shipping over barrels of honey, and their barrels of honey are only $2 each. Most people are going to buy the $2 version instead of the $5 version, which means the American economy is not benefiting, the Spanish one is. But if we slap a $5 tariff on the Spanish goods coming in, that takes a $2 barrel of honey to now a $7 barrel of honey. So now it's between my American $5 barrel of honey and the Spanish $7 barrel of honey, and most people will pick the $5, which means that the money is staying in the American economy, it's continuing to rotate around, and that's keeping our economy healthy. So these protective tariffs are meant to protect individuals inside the United States and keep the money inside our own country. So that's the first element, tariffs. The second major chunk of the American system is the Second National Bank. We'll talk about that in just a second. The third aspect of the American system, so 1, 2, 3, the third is internal improvements. And these are internal improvements that are going to be funded by the federal government. Two examples of that we'll look at are the National Road and the Canal System. All right, so let's talk about the Second National Bank. Here's another picture of Clay. I like to find as many pictures of him as I can. He's always interesting to look at, but there he is. So the Second National Bank. Remember, the First National Bank was started by Hamilton. Remember, Hamilton wanted the bank. Thomas Jefferson didn't want the bank. Washington had to decide, and he ended up going with, yes, okay, we do need a national bank. And that bank did us really well. It helped get us out of a little bit of debt, right? But it expired in 1811. And we had to decide as a country whether or not we were going to renew that charter for that bank or if we were going to let it expire on its own. And Congress voted and actually tied. It was a tie vote to either renew or let it expire. And the then Vice President, George Clinton, underneath Madison, actually voted to let it expire. So the first bank is now out. It's no longer in existence, but we're doing all right because our economy's good. We're doing okay. And then the War of 1812 happens. And Madison quickly realizes, wow, if I had a national bank, it would be so much easier to fight this war. Turns out that having, a large chunk of money that the federal government controls at my disposal would be helpful. So the War of 1812 is going to open up the eyes of people who were kind of, against the bank, saying that, okay, yeah, we need it. So underneath the American system, underneath Henry Clay's plan, we're going to recharter a national bank. It's the second national bank, so we call it the Second National Bank. And that charters in 1816, and that'll be good for 20 years. Now, this is important, not just because, we need a national bank, that's an important thing to have, but if you remember, Democratic Republicans hated the national bank, right? Thomas Jefferson himself fought tooth and nail against Alexander Hamilton over the bank. He thought it was a really, really, really bad idea. But this is showing, right, that the Democratic Republicans are adopting certain aspects of the federal or the Federalist Party, which is why they're kind of starting to mesh well together, is because they're starting to become more like the other person. Now, the national road, and, it's exactly what it sounds like. We're going to build a major, and I say highway, we use that term very loosely, right? This isn't a bunch of like horses and wagons going 60 miles an hour, right? This is very much just a basic road, right? But it's a well-known road. It's a road that anyone traveling in this vicinity would use. And it's built and produced by the federal government, which is important. It takes a really long time for us to build it, 1811 to 1837. When it ends, it's about 620 miles long. One of the longest, roads we're going to have, and it's very important because it's going to connect the Potomac and the Ohio rivers, and it's going to be basically a major thoroughfare. So think of like in world history, right? The Silk Road and how it connected all those trade routes. That's what this is for the United States on a smaller scale, right? It's the national road. Also, when it's redone in the 1830s, it's going to be used with a new system that looks a lot like our modern day concrete called the macadamia process. You see a picture right here. It's basically throwing a bunch of rock and sand and stuff onto the actual ground that you're trying to turn into pavement. And then you put a bonding agent on it, so it kind of forms into this hard cement, this concrete. You've seen this before. You've probably scraped your knee on this before. It's the worst because those rocks stick up and they grab your skin. It's the worst. But it was the best back then. Cool. The other aspect of internal improvements we're going to see under the American system is the Erie Canal. Takes us a while to build it too, 1817 to 1825. When it's done, it's 363 miles long. It spans from Albany, New York to Buffalo, New York. Now, the reason this is important is because we wanted a water route that we could take from New York City or the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Great Lakes. Remember that, throughout world history we've seen so far, we're obsessed with water routes. So if we can create a man-made canal, right, a man-made waterway, that would be very, very beneficial for us. And it is. When it's completed, it's actually the second at that point to the Grand Canal in China. So a pretty big feat for us, and it's going to be extremely effective. This is going to completely skyrocket New York's economy and going to help make the exchange of goods faster and more efficient. So great thing for New York and the North. Here's a better blown up map for that. All right. So under the American system, the West is going to get roads, they get canals, they get federal aid, they're getting a lot of stuff. The East, specifically the Northeast, right, is benefiting from those protective tariffs that are keeping their goods inside America. So that's great. And the South is kind of looking around going, okay, I guess none for us. And it kind of was none for us. I mean, the country benefits as a whole, which is always good, but they definitely weren't getting the benefit like the rest of this. This is going to later lead to, ideas of sectionalism and stuff that we'll talk about later. But things are going well for James Monroe. The election of 1820 comes around, and we decide we are having such a great time in the era of good feelings. It's such a good time. We'll re-elect James Monroe. James Monroe wins every single electoral vote except for one. One man, Plummer is his name, decided that if he cast his vote for Monroe, then Monroe would win unanimously. And the only president we want to ever have won unanimously was George Washington. So he claimed that that was the sole reason he's going to cast a vote for someone else. And the man he picked, as you can see at the bottom there in that little key, was John Quincy Adams, right? The current Secretary of State. More on him later, of course. All right, the country's growing, the country's expanding, moving more westward. Around 1791 to 1819, we're going to see the addition of 9 new states. So our country's rapidly growing. Remember that we have plenty of territories, but in order to become a state, we need to have, lines drawn. We need to have a high enough population, and we need to ask for statehood. And when that's finally approved, we'll officially become a state. Now, because of the areas these different states are joining in, usually it's pretty straightforward whether or not they would become a free state or a slave state. And so far, they've been entering one at a time, one free, one slave, one free, one slave. And that's important because having balance in Congress is an important element, right? We need to have as close to even slave states as free states. That way, no one side gets the upper hand on the other one. I'm obviously prefacing an issue that's going to come up later, of course. But for now, just know that we're all right because we're equal free and equal slave. This is a great little graphic that we'll run through that shows the change in the territories over the span of, let's see, technically 1750 all the way up to 2000. We'll watch it for a little bit. This is great. So right there, 1820, we'll stop there. If you have the slideshow, go ahead and watch that fully if you want to. It's a really cool graphic to watch. But for now, we see ourselves moving, and we are moving west for a variety of reasons, right? Westward expansion is really going to blossom during this time period for a couple different reasons. One, westward movement, the idea of getting somewhere, excuse me, and continuing to move west has always been kind of an element of our country, right? We literally showed up in the 13 colonies and started moving westward. So that's always been a significant, idea and goal for our country. We also have a lot of cheap land in Ohio that people are attracted to, not just Americans, but also European immigrants. Land exhaustion, some of the older tobacco states, so South Carolina, is going to see soil erosion and depletion because when you plant the same thing over and over and over again in the same spot without rotating your crops, the soil is going to kind of, get crispy. So some people are moving west because of that, because the soil now has been depleted. It's also really, really cheap to move west. You need a very small amount of money to put down. Remember, the embargo was been kind of a bummer for the economy, so people are looking to make a change, right? We have improved transportation now that the roads and canals are open. It's a great way to funnel people into the west. We also have the invention of steamboats, we'll talk about next week, and of course the concept of manifest destiny. We will spend time in the coming unit talking about manifest destiny and how Americans truly believed it was their right to, control the entire what will become continental United States. And then we'll leave it here with this great map that shows you kind of what the United States is looking like in 1820. So we've got our original kind of 13 colonies here. We've got all these pink areas have been states that have been added since then. We have, of course, later we'll have Florida. We get Mississippi and Alabama added as states. We get Louisiana. We have all this territory, which was purchased in the Louisiana Territory transaction. We've named those now. We're currently working on getting as many people out there as we can so we can settle those and get statehood to that area. And remember also the Oregon country that we now currently share with England for now. All right, so that was the American system, the 3 elements, of course, being tariffs, the Second National Bank, and internal improvements. Remember that Henry Clay was the creator of the American system. All right, make sure to answer your objective question, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.